Good evening and welcome to another Magic Lantern show. This evening we're going to be looking at a very Victorian story, a real fable if ever there was one, The Babes in the Wood. Those of you of a nervous disposition, I suggest you look away towards the end. The Babes in the Wood. Once upon a time there lived, in the county of Norfolk, a certain well-to-do gentleman, who had a pleasant home, a good and loving wife, and two pretty little children, a boy and a girl. They lived a peaceful and happy life, for the father was good and a kindly man, beloved of his neighbours. But a great trouble came to them when the father and mother both fell sick, and it seemed they were like to die, as indeed they shortly did. It grieved them sorely to leave their two children, who were yet as mere babes. So the father sent for his brother, and committed them into his charge, asking him to be good and kind to them, for he was the only friend that they had, and he must be a father, mother, and uncle all in one. The uncle told them that they need have no fear for the children's welfare. He would look after them, and said he, God never prosper me nor mine, nor anything that I have, if I do them any wrong. Well, that was a very solemn promise. And though, of course, they were still very sorry to leave them, the parents felt that their children would be safely looked after, until they were old enough to look after themselves. For a time, the children were treated fairly. He took them to his house, and the children were as happy as any little children could be, who had lost a kind father and mother. But the uncle was a wicked and greedy man, and even as he played with the children, he began to think how he would get hold of the money that their father had left in his will. £300 a year for the boy when he came of age, and 500 in good golden sovereigns for the girl when she should be old enough to marry. Poor little babes. Whilst Janie was enjoying her rider-clock horse, and Johnny was galloping around on his toy Gigi, their seeming kind uncle was hatching a terrible plot against them in that wicked head of his, quite regardless of the solemn promise he had lately made to his late dead brother. He would get rid of those two children somehow, who were only a worry and trouble to him, and then the money would be his. Now this uncle, though such an evil man and determined to do this wicked and cruel thing, passed for a good and respectable man amongst his neighbours. So he set to work in a very underhand fashion, thinking that he would not be found out. He sent for two old companions of his who had been thieves and drunkards and gamblers, who were always hard up, and who, he knew, would do what he required if he paid them well. To them he told the whole story, and he bargained with them to take the children away and slay them in the neighbouring wood. Then he made up an artful story that he was sending them to London to a friend of his who would look after their education. This tale he told to his wife to account for their disappearance, and he thought that he would now be quite safe. When the children were told that they were to go for a ride on horseback with two kind gentlemen, they were naturally delighted. But when the kind gentlemen appeared, they looked at them a little doubtfully. "They don't look very kind," whispered Janie to her brother, "do they?" "Oh well," he replied, "they've got nice horses anyway." And as that seemed to be the most important thing, they were soon mounted, and away they went. How delightful it was to ride along the country lanes on this fine summer's morning! The banks by the roadside were full of wild flowers, The larks were singing gaily. The rabbits scuttled into their burrows as they crossed the common towards the wood. And the children were soon chatting merrily to their surly companions. They told them about the robin's nest in the garden, and how Duchess, the spaniel, had got a family of little puppies, and a number of other interesting things. Eventually they began to get hungry and asked the men to take them home for dinner. But they took no notice of this request, only galloped on all the faster, till they came to the thickest part of the wood, and then they got off their horses and lifted the children off as well. This was the place where they had agreed to kill the children. But now one of the robbers, who was rather kinder-hearted than the other, and had been somewhat softened by the children's prattling, said it was a cruel thing to do, and for his part he wouldn't have anything to do with their murder. The two men had got their money, he said, so why not leave the children in the wood? But the other robber said that they had been paid to kill them, and killed they must be. They got to high words about it, and soon the robbers were fighting one another, while the children looked on in terror. The milder ruffian of the two was successful in the fight, being the better swordsman, and his adversary was presently killed by a deadly thrust of his sword. He took from the dead man his share of the money, and then he turned to the children, thinking what he should do with them. The robber had refused to actually kill the children, but I'm not sure that it was much kinder to leave them in the wood. And that is what the robber did. He wanted to get back to his wild companions in the town, and there spend his ill-gotten money. So he told the children that he would go and get some food for them, and would soon come back again. And then he went away, never to return. The dear little ones believed him, thinking he was their friend, for after all he did save their life. But hour after hour went by, and they saw no more of him. Hungry and thirsty, poor little Janey began to cry. Johnny, like the brave little chap he was, tried to comfort her, and told her that they would soon get out of the wood and find their way home again. But evening came on, and the stars began to peep, and they seemed to be more hopelessly lost than ever. But they found some nuts and berries to eat, and they got a drink of water from a little brook that ran alongside the trees. And then, quite tired out, they lay down on a bed of moss and fell asleep. When the children woke, it was daylight again. The birds were singing gaily, and a squirrel was peeping down at them from amongst the green leaves. But there was no pleasure for the poor children. They were, oh, so hungry. And so they set to work again to try and find their way out, but with no greater success than last time. And so for 2 or 3 days they wandered up and down the wood, tired, hungry, frightened at every sound. And on the 4th day they were quite ill and weak, for one cannot live long on nuts and berries, especially when even those are few and far between. So at last they lay down on their mossy bed, and kissing each other they fell asleep once more. And the silent angel of death came and released their poor tired little souls, and took them to join their father and mother. The birds were sorry that the poor babes had come to so sad an end, if no one else was, and the bright-eyed little robins presently came around them in crowds, each bringing a crimson or gold leaf in its beak, and these they laid on the dead children until they were covered with what looked like a beautiful royal cloak of crimson and gold. And what happened to the wicked uncle? Well, the children were certainly out of his way now, and he settled down to enjoy his ill-gotten fortune. But nothing went well with him. His crops failed, his cattle strayed or got the plague, his horses sickened and died, his servants robbed him. And then, to crown all, his castle caught fire one night, and he barely escaped with his life. He found himself without money or friends, and far worse off than when his little nephew and niece were alive. The uncle wandered homeless for many a year, till at last he died of fever in the prison into which he had been put because he could not pay his debts. And the whole story of his crime came to light, for the robber who had left the children in the wood, after he had spent all his money, took to stealing again, and was caught, and made a full confession. And as people were hanged in those days for stealing, hanged he was, and it served him right too. And so ends the story of the babes in the wood. That story is, if I'm quite honest, rather gruesome, isn't it? And unlike many fairy tales or fables, it doesn't have a particularly pleasant ending. No one really lives, no one comes out better. The only good thing, I guess, is that the children didn't have too long in misery. Yet that was the way of Victorian writers. They really basked in death and misery. I wonder now if I can show you a little bit about how some of these slides were made. I've got a slightly better camera than I had last time, and if I zoom in, you can see how, look on Janie's dress for example, how it appears to be bubbling. That's because these slides, at nearly 100 years old, would originally have been placed in a magic lantern that was lit with a flamed lamp of some sort, maybe paraffin lamp or the like. And after a while these lamps got very hot and caused the paint or the pigment inside the slides to bubble. And so that's why many slides nowadays have got bubbles on them. Both the slides and the reading are original from the late 19th or early 20th century, and indeed there's much in the wording that is quite hard to get one's tongue around. Yet I hope you enjoyed it. It was perhaps 10 minutes of your life that you won't get back again, but 10 minutes where you were able to sit and enjoy a story that your forebears may well have enjoyed a century ago. Good night.